Picture this. It's a cold October night in 1837. You're walking home through the dark streets of Victorian London when suddenly a figure leaps from the shadows. Before you can scream, you see glowing eyes, metallic claws, and a face twisted into something inhuman. The creature bounds away in impossible jumps, clearing fences and buildings in a single leap, disappearing into the London fog. This isn't science fiction. For nearly 70 years, Spring-Heeled Jack terrorized England, becoming one of the most enduring mysteries of the Victorian era. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's strangest cases, a mystery that sits at the crossroads of mass hysteria, human capability, and possibly something far more extraordinary. Was Spring-Heeled Jack a talented acrobat with a twisted sense of humor? A madman with exceptional athletic abilities? Or could the impossible nature of his feats suggest something truly otherworldly? Stay with me, because this case gets stranger with every detail. Let's set the stage. Victorian England, 1837. This is a time of gaslight and fog. Jack the Ripper is still decades away, but London streets are already dangerous. The Industrial Revolution has created sprawling urban areas where the rich and poor live in close proximity, and sensational stories sell newspapers like hotcakes. The first documented encounter with Spring-Heeled Jack happens in September 1837, though rumors have been circulating for months. A businessman is walking home when a figure leaps from a dark alley, landing directly in front of him. The witness describes a man in tight-fitting clothing who bounds away with incredible leaps before he can react. But it's what happens in October 1837 that really ignites public panic. Mary Stevens, a servant girl, is walking through Clapham Common when she's attacked. She describes her assailant as having a terrifying appearance with cold, clammy hands that felt like a corpse. But here's where it gets weird. The attacker tears at her clothes and face, then bounds away with superhuman leaps. Mary's screams attract help, but Spring-Heeled Jack has already vanished. The very next day, the same area, another incident. A figure leaps in front of a carriage, causing the driver to crash. Witnesses swear the figure jumped over a 9-foot wall and disappeared, laughing maniacally. By January 1838, the Lord Mayor of London is receiving so many complaints that he makes a public statement about these attacks. The newspapers are having a field day, dubbing the attacker Spring-Heeled Jack, and with that name, a legend is born. Now, here's what makes these early cases so compelling. Multiple witnesses, completely unknown to each other, are describing the same bizarre characteristics: superhuman jumping ability, clearing walls and buildings that should be physically impossible, glowing or red eyes that seem to burn in the darkness, metal claws instead of fingernails, the ability to breathe blue and white flames from his mouth, tight-fitting, strange clothing that some describe as resembling white oilskin or a type of suit, incredible speed and agility. These aren't just a few scattered reports. We're talking dozens of witnesses across multiple locations, all describing something that defies normal explanation. But the two cases that really cemented Jack in history happened within days of each other, and they're absolutely wild. On February 18, 1838, Lucy Scales and her sister are walking home through Limehouse. As they pass Green Dragon Alley, a figure jumps down from a height, landing directly in front of Lucy. The figure breathes blue flames directly into her face. Lucy immediately goes into violent fits, experiencing what sounds like a seizure or shock. Her sister's screams bring help, but once again, Spring-Heeled Jack escapes with impossible leaps. Now, here's what's important. Lucy Scales is from a respectable family. This isn't tabloid fodder. Her testimony is taken seriously, and it matches other accounts perfectly. But the attack that really broke the case wide open happened just 2 days later. February 20th, 1838. 18-year-old Jane Alsop is at home in Bow when there's a violent knock at the door. A man claims to be a police officer and asks for a light, saying they've caught Spring-Heeled Jack in the lane. Jane brings a candle. The moment she hands it over, the figure throws off his cloak. Jane gives one of the most detailed descriptions we have of Spring-Heeled Jack. His eyes were like balls of fire. He wore a large helmet and a tight-fitting white costume like oilskin. He vomited blue and white flames from his mouth, and his hands were cold and clammy like those of a corpse, but with claws like a monster. Spring-Heeled Jack grabs Jane, tears at her dress and hair with his claws. She screams, and he begins tearing at her neck and arms. Her sister hears the screams and pulls her inside, slamming the door. Through the window, they watch as Spring-Heeled Jack bounds away with jumps that clear the garden gate effortlessly, laughing the entire time. Here's why this case matters so much. Jane Alsop's testimony was given under oath at a police court. Her injuries were documented. Multiple family members were witnesses. This wasn't hysteria or newspaper sensationalism. This was an official criminal investigation. Police investigated thoroughly. They searched the area. They interviewed dozens of witnesses. And they found nothing. No suspect was ever caught. No explanation was ever found for who could perform these athletic feats or why they were attacking random people in the night. The investigation revealed one tantalizing detail, though. Several witnesses reported seeing Spring-Heeled Jack arrive and depart from the scene in what they described as impossible ways. One witness swore he saw the figure land on a rooftop from a standing jump. Another claimed he watched Spring-Heeled Jack leap completely over a house. These aren't the exaggerations of a single witness. These are consistent reports from multiple sources, describing something that shouldn't be physically possible. So let's break down the theories, starting with the most rational explanation. Spring-Heeled Jack was human. But not just any human, an exceptional one. Theory 1. The aristocratic prankster. The most popular theory at the time was that Spring-Heeled Jack was actually Henry de la Poer Beresford, the Marquis of Waterford. Here's why this theory gained traction. The Marquis was notorious for his cruel pranks and drunken behavior. He had a history of attacking women and committing violent acts while intoxicated. He was wealthy enough to afford elaborate costumes and equipment, and several people claimed to have recognized him despite his disguise. There's even a story that he made a bet with his aristocratic friends about who could create the greatest public panic. What better way to win than to become Spring-Heeled Jack? But here's the problem with this theory. The Marquis of Waterford died in 1859, yet Spring-Heeled Jack sightings continued well into the 1870s and beyond. Unless he faked his death, which seems unlikely, this doesn't explain the full timeline. Theory 2. The theatrical acrobat. Victorian England was the golden age of circus and theatrical performance. Acrobats could perform seemingly impossible feats. Spring-loaded boots existed. They were used in some theatrical productions to help performers jump higher. Could Spring-Heeled Jack have been a circus performer, possibly using spring-loaded stilts or boots to achieve those incredible jumps? The tight-fitting costume witnesses described sounds exactly like performance wear. This theory explains the physical feats. It explains the theatrical nature of the attacks, the dramatic appearances, the breathing of flames, which could be accomplished with phosphorus or alcohol tricks known to performers. But it doesn't explain the motivation. Why would a performer risk their career and freedom to randomly attack people? Why continue for decades? And how did they never get caught, despite dozens of police investigations? Theory 3. Multiple perpetrators. Here's a more complex, but perhaps more realistic theory. There was no single Spring-Heeled Jack. Instead, the legend inspired copycat attackers across England for nearly 7 decades. The evidence supports this. Attacks happened simultaneously in locations hundreds of miles apart, too far for one person to travel in the time frame. Different witnesses described variations in height, build, and costume details. Maybe the first spring-heeled Jack was an aristocrat or an acrobat. But once the legend took hold, others adopted the persona. Some might have been pranksters, others genuinely disturbed individuals, using the costume as cover for violent assaults. This explains the longevity of the phenomenon, the geographic spread, and the slight variations in descriptions. It's the most rational explanation that fits the facts. But here's what none of these theories adequately explain: the consistency of the impossible feats. We're not talking about good jumps or impressive athleticism. Witnesses described jumps of 20, 30, even 40 feet, vertical and horizontal. They described landings on church steeples and rooftops. They described speeds that shouldn't be humanly possible. Even with spring-loaded boots, even with exceptional athletic ability, many of these feats seem to violate basic physics. And that brings us to the other theory. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aliens? In Victorian England? But hear me out, because when you look at the evidence with fresh eyes, some very strange patterns emerge. The physical evidence. Let's start with what witnesses actually described. The tight-fitting suit that looked like oilskin or some strange material. In an era of wool and cotton, multiple witnesses independently described clothing that didn't match anything available at the time. Does that sound like a spacesuit or protective gear to anyone else? The helmet. Several witnesses specifically mentioned a large helmet or headpiece. Why would an acrobat or aristocrat need a helmet? But if you're from another planet with different atmospheric needs, the glowing eyes. Multiple reports of eyes that glowed red or burned with an unnatural light. This wasn't just in darkness. Witnesses saw this effect clearly. Reflective lenses? Some kind of technology? The flame breathing? This is where it gets really interesting. Witnesses described blue and white flames coming from spring-heeled Jack's mouth. These aren't the colors of normal fire from a theatrical trick. Blue flame suggests a high-temperature chemical reaction, or possibly some kind of propulsion system or weapon. The impossible physics. Let's talk numbers. The current world record for a standing high jump is about 5 feet. The running high jump record is just over 8 feet. Olympic long jumpers can reach about 29 feet with a running start. Spring-heeled Jack was described as clearing 9-foot walls from a standing position, jumping onto rooftops 20 to 30 feet high, covering distances of 40-plus feet in a single bound, and landing with no apparent impact or injury. Even with spring-loaded boots, these feats violate conservation of energy. You can't generate that much force from human leg muscles, even augmented. The landings alone should cause severe injury from the G-forces involved. Unless, of course, you're dealing with different physics. Lower body weight from a planet with less gravity? Advanced propulsion technology disguised as jumping? Some form of anti-gravity or thrust system? The pattern of behavior. Here's what's really intriguing. Spring-heeled Jack's behavior doesn't quite fit human psychology, even disturbed human psychology. The attacks were seemingly random. No sexual assault despite opportunities. No robbery despite attacking well-dressed victims. No murder despite having the capability. The attacks seem almost experimental. Like someone testing human reactions, gathering information, studying us. The responses of spring-heeled Jack often seemed inhuman. Multiple witnesses described laughter that didn't sound quite right, movements that seemed jerky or unnatural, and a complete lack of fear of capture. And then there's the longevity. Sightings continued from 1837 to the 1870s and beyond, with consistent descriptions spanning decades. Either this was the most dedicated hoaxer in history, or something else was going on. The broader context. Here's something most people don't know. The Victorian era had its own wave of UFO sightings. The airship mystery of the 1890s and 1900s saw thousands of reports of strange craft in the sky across England and America. There were also other strange creature sightings during this period, not just Spring-Heeled Jack. Reports of strange beings, unusual phenomena, things that don't fit neatly into the historical record. What if Spring-Heeled Jack wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern? What if an extraterrestrial being or beings were stranded or conducting observations in Victorian England? The technological gap would explain everything. The impossible physical feats, the strange equipment, the odd behavior that seemed to be studying human reactions. The marooned alien theory. Imagine this scenario. An alien visitor arrives on Earth, possibly by accident or as part of an observation mission. They're stranded in Victorian England with technology far beyond human understanding. They need to move around, perhaps gather resources, maybe study the local population to understand how to get home or survive. Their propulsion system allows them to make impossible jumps. Their suit protects them from Earth's environment and appears strange to human eyes. Their appearance is frightening because they're not human or because their protective gear distorts their features. The attacks might not be attacks at all, but clumsy attempts at contact or specimen gathering. A flame breathing could be a defensive mechanism or a malfunction. The seemingly random nature of encounters could be an alien trying to understand human society and behavior. And when they finally leave or die, the sightings stop. The legend remains. So where does that leave us? Let's weigh the evidence objectively. Arguments for human origin? Victorian society was ripe for mass hysteria and sensational stories. Copycat attackers could explain the decades-long timeline. Human nature includes individuals who commit bizarre, attention-seeking acts. No concrete evidence of extraterrestrial involvement exists. Spring-loaded boots and theatrical tricks could explain some feats. The attacks caused real harm, which fits human criminal behavior arguments for extraordinary origin. The consistency of impossible physical feats across dozens of witnesses, multiple independent descriptions of technology that didn't exist in the era, the lack of any caught perpetrator despite extensive investigations, the patterns of behavior that don't fit human psychology, the longevity and geographic spread of sightings, corroborating strange phenomena from the same time period. Here's my take, and I want to be intellectually honest here. The rational, evidence-based conclusion is that Spring-Heeled Jack was probably human. Most likely, it was multiple humans over the decades, possibly starting with an aristocratic prankster and evolving into copycats and legend. But, and this is a big one, there are elements of this case that don't fit neatly into that explanation. The descriptions of physical feats are too consistent, too impossible, to dismiss entirely. The technology described by witnesses was genuinely ahead of its time. Could there be a middle ground? Could Spring-Heeled Jack have been a human using technology we don't know about? Victorian England was a hotbed of innovation. Maybe someone developed experimental equipment, propulsion devices, protective suits that were lost to history. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a 5% chance that something genuinely anomalous happened in Victorian England. That a visitor from elsewhere found themselves stranded in a foggy, gaslit world, and the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack is humanity's imperfect record of that encounter. The legacy. What's undeniable is Spring-Heeled Jack's impact on culture. He influenced everything from penny dreadfuls to modern superhero comics. The image of a figure bounding across rooftops, striking from the shadows, became a template for countless fictional characters. The last confirmed sighting of Spring-Heeled Jack was in 1904, though some claim encounters continued into the 20th century. Eventually, The legend faded as Victorian England gave way to the modern age. But the mystery remains. Was Spring-Heeled Jack an insane acrobat with extraordinary abilities and elaborate equipment? A disturbed aristocrat playing cruel games? Multiple copycats keeping a legend alive? Or something far stranger, a marooned alien trying to survive in a world not their own? The truth is, we may never know for certain. The Victorian era is just distant enough that evidence has been lost. Witnesses are long dead, and the facts have been colored by legend and time. But that's what makes Spring-Heeled Jack so compelling. It's a mystery that sits at the perfect intersection of the possible and the impossible. It's credible enough to have happened, yet strange enough to defy easy explanation. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not everything in history fits into neat categories. Some mysteries remain mysteries, challenging us to keep questioning, keep investigating, and keep our minds open to possibilities we haven't considered. What do you think? Was Spring-Heeled Jack human or something more? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Victorian mystery, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more unexplained phenomena to explore. Until next time, keep looking up, keep questioning, and remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Sometimes it's hiding in the fog of a Victorian night, waiting to leap out when you least expect it.